Hello, and sorry for the delay. We had a little of technical difficulties. Welcome everyone to LAPL's live video on YouTube for another mental health program in collaboration with Los Angeles County Psychological Association. In honor of Latinx Heritage Month, we are honored to have our guest speaker, Dr. Leticia Amick, here with us. Today's topic is Latinx mental health awareness, moving our communities forward and celebrating our heritage. Dr. Amick, PhD, specializes in psychological assessment and services to children, adolescents, and families, and provides individual therapy to adults. She also served at the LA County Psychological Association president in 2019. Dr. Amick identifies as an indigenous Guatemalan cisgender woman. She had the unique experience of growing up with a dual culture, having been adopted at the age of 3 into a white family and raised in a rural area of western Colorado. Leticia enjoys nature walks, traveling, and reading mystery thriller fictions. She values time with her husband, attending sporting events, classical music, concerts, theater, and ballet performances. She wholeheartedly agrees with the Dickens quote, "What greater gift than the love of a cat?" Thank you, Doctor, for being here.
Thank you very much for that really nice introduction. So, yes, I am going to speak today about Latinx mental health awareness. And during the National Hispanic Heritage Month, I choose to honor my ancestors by thinking each day about the sacrifices they made so that I could be here. I also want to acknowledge the indigenous people who inhabited the land I currently live on. So blessings to the Gabrielino Tongva Nation. I want to also let you know that I'm using various identifiers today, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, interchangeably. I recognize that individuals have preferences regarding the terms they use to identify themselves, and that the Latino community is not monolithic. We are very diverse, multiracial, and multicultural. I would like you to please excuse some of my Spanish pronunciations. As mentioned in my introduction, although my very first language was Spanish, I grew up in an English only household from age 3. My attempts to learn Spanish have not resulted in becoming fluent, sadly. Okay, if we can move to slide 2. Thank you very much. So, again, just kind of a background about Hispanic Heritage Month. It's been around since 1988. Ronald Reagan signed the bill to extend the celebration from a week to a full month. So originally it was just a week um, throughout the year, but now we have a full month. It is celebrated from September 15th to October 15th because 7 Latin American countries celebrate their independence during this time period. Hispanic has become a kind of a catch-all phrase to include dozens of nationalities and races and identities, and became a census category in 1980. So, I believe it's every 4 years we get these things in the mail that ask us to give some information about our families, and that's the national census. Since then, Latino and more recently the gender inclusive term Latinx has become more widely used. So if you're here live with us today, and if you could in the Q&A, tell us a little bit about what a Hispanic Heritage Month means to you, or if it's important to you, or why. And I'll wait a few minutes to see if anyone puts anything in the chat. Not sure if anyone wants to share at this time, and that's okay. You may not necessarily have anything specific that you celebrate during the month, but I'm glad to know that the schools and different agencies and employers are kind of getting more on board about having some celebrations to recognize Hispanic Heritage Month. So that's good to know. All right, let's go to slide number 3, please. So today I will be discussing mental health within the Latino communities, barriers to mental health care, and ways we can support one another for better mental health while honoring our traditions. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's start with some statistical facts. The Hispanic population has quadrupled in the past 4 decades. It has also become more diverse. More than 62 million Americans, that's 19% of the total population, identify as Hispanic or Latino in the 2020 census. Census data also indicates a growing demographic variation within our group. Hispanic Americans trace their ethnicity to dozens of countries of origin. 7 in 10 Hispanic Americans can trace their heritage to Mexico or Puerto Rico. 44% of Hispanics live in California or Texas. But populations are growing and continue to grow in every state. The majority of Hispanic Americans were born as U.S. citizens. Among Hispanics, 67% were born in the U.S. 13% are naturalized citizens, and 20% are not U.S. citizens. Unfortunately, there are many misconceptions and stereotypes about who Latinos are and about our history and presence in the United States. Some Mexican Americans have been in the U.S. for many generations. In fact, most of California and the Southwest was once part of Mexico. New immigrants from South America, Central America, and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean countries continue to be part of the growing presence of Latinos. Since 2000, the primary source of Latino population growth has swung from immigration to native births. Also, the Latino population includes many indigenous groups. All right, next slide, please. So let's start talking about some mental health. Thank you very much. So mental health conditions do not discriminate on race, color, gender, or identity. Anyone can experience challenges of mental illness, regardless of their background. However, your concerns and experiences and how you understand and cope with these conditions may be different. The prevalence of mental health problems varies amongst Latino subgroups and reflects the diversity of experiences and circumstances. Because of the diversity that exists among individuals, it is important to consider the impact of this diversity and what it has on what we understand about Latinos seeking mental health treatment or needing mental health treatment. Culture can be defined as shared values, beliefs, and shared attributes of a group of people that influences their customs, norms, and psychosocial processes. Culture has an impact on symptoms that individuals may have. For example, ataques de nervios, or attack of the nerves, is a cultural bound syndrome of distress, which includes symptoms as uncontrollable screaming, shouting, crying, trembling, sensations of heat rising in the chest and head, dissociative experiences, and verbal or physical aggression. Ataques de nervios is associated with high rates of comorbidity with several anxiety disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorder, general anxiety disorder, and panic disorder. In general, less acculturated Latinos who have experienced trauma are more likely to experience the dissociative type symptoms than their more acculturated counterparts. Some other examples of cultural bound syndromes include cholera or anger and rage disturbing body balances, leading to headache, screaming, stomach pain, loss of consciousness, and fatigue. Additionally, there's what's called mal de ojo, medical problems such as vomiting, fever, diarrhea, and mental health problems like anxiety and depression could result from mal de ojo, or the evil eye. The individual experienced from another person. Recent Latino immigrants are at risk for traumatic exposure, both before and after migration. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and stress, is often associated with the immigration experience and challenges of integration versus marginalization in the U.S. Individuals who come from countries with a history of political violence often have multiple traumatic experiences. Youth from the growing Central American exodus, also known as unaccompanied refugee minors, have high rates of traumatic exposure, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety. U.S. citizen children of undocumented parents are also at risk of anxiety given their parents' tenuous legal status and the fear of deportation. I think we've all seen examples of that in our own community here in LA area. And it's very disturbing when we see those things happening. And I also am talking a little bit about what we call covert and overt discrimination, because I feel like both of those things can have a real impact on our mental health. So overt discrimination examples are things like hate speech. You see people getting together and saying terrible things about a particular group of people. Systemic racism and racial profiling and police brutality. Covert discrimination is more like microaggressions, implicit hiring discrimination, implicit housing discrimination, implicit legal rights discrimination, and implicit sales customer service discrimination. Just a little bit more about microaggressions, because that's kind of a newer term. But these kind of remarks or questions or actions are very painful because they have to do with a person's membership of a group that's discriminated against or the subject of stereotypes. And oftentimes, you'll hear the argument that, oh, you're just being too sensitive. I was just joking. I didn't, why are you being so sensitive about that? However, the person who is saying these things, they may know that they're giving a microaggression towards you, or they may really not, because they're not educated about when they say those types of things, how it feels to another person who isn't in the dominant group. Sometimes it's just getting that question all the time of, where are you from, or what are you? That can just get tired over time, and it can cause quite a bit of distress. And I'll share with all of you a personal situation that I experienced that was, I guess you'd say, more of a microaggression. One time when I was moving out of an apartment, I returned to the manager's office with my keys to turn them in and say, hey, I'm out of the apartment and I'm leaving. But the individual who was in the manager's office said to me, oh, did you get that place cleaned up? Oh, that's good to know. So, that was someone assuming that because of how I looked, they didn't ask my name or anything. They were assuming that I was the person who was cleaning the apartment up. So again, that's just kind of judging someone on how they look and not even asking, what my name was. And that's just not a very comfortable position to be in. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm referring to some of those microaggressions or covert discrimination that many of us have faced over time. Okay, so suicide and substance use, as well as many mental health disorders, increase among second and third generation Latinos as compared to first generation immigrants. This is part of what is known as the immigrant paradox. So, immigrants who, despite multiple stressors, appear relatively healthy compared to their more acculturated counterparts. As Latinos are more exposed to discrimination and unsafe neighborhoods and poor educational systems and attainment, mental health issues may become more prevalent. As Latinos reside longer in the U.S., they unfortunately lose some of the potentially protective effects of their culture. So there's not quite maybe during second, third, even fourth generations living here in the United States, there's not quite that connection that they used to have or that their grandparents had with one another. Latino culture is known for its collectivist family orientation, the importance of personally I'm sorry about that. The importance of personalismo or personal connectedness in interaction and respect for authority. Conversely, an increase in rates of psychiatric disorders and suicide is seen with increasing acculturation or assimilation into the American culture. However, on the other side, being bicultural and bilingual is actually protective for our youth, both academically and for their mental health. If we could go to slide 6, I want to talk a little bit about some of the barriers to mental health care for our community. So first, I'll talk a little bit about inequity. So Hispanic Latinx communities show similar vulnerability to mental illness as the general population, but they face, unfortunately, disparities in both getting access to and the quality of treatment that other groups may receive. This inequality puts us at a higher risk for more severe and persistent forms of mental health conditions because without treatment, mental health conditions often worsen. Language barriers. So, language barriers can make communicating with providers difficult or even impossible, particularly when a person is seeking counseling for sensitive or uniquely personal issues. These topics can be difficult for anyone to put into words, but it is especially difficult for those who may not speak the same language as the potential provider, or if your provider does not understand cultural issues. You have the right to receive language access services at institutions that receive funding from the federal government. You have the right to request a trained interpreter, a certified interpreter, and to receive forms and information in Spanish. All right, poverty and less health insurance coverage. Approximately 17% of Hispanic Latinx people in the U.S. live in poverty, compared to 8% of non-Hispanic whites. Individuals who live in poverty have a higher risk of mental illness, and conversely, individuals with mental illness have a higher risk of living in poverty. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2019, 20% of non-elderly Hispanic people had no form of health insurance. In addition to facing an already limited pool of providers due to language barriers, people identifying as Hispanic and Latinx have even fewer options when they are uninsured. And also, if you aren't insured, It can sometimes be very difficult to find that right provider who you feel is culturally competent, as we found, unfortunately, that a lot of providers don't take insurance. Lack of cultural competence. So, due to cultural differences or a lack of competency, mental health providers may misunderstand or misdiagnose the Hispanic or Latinx individual. For example, an individual may describe feeling nervios, tiredness, headaches, other physical ailments. These symptoms are consistent with depression, but a provider who doesn't have training may and not understand how culture influences a person's interpretation of their symptoms may end up misdiagnosing a person. Legal status. For immigrants who arrive without documentation, the fear of deportation can prevent them from seeking the help they really need. For example, even though millions of children of undocumented immigrants are eligible for health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, many families either may not know about their eligibility or they may be afraid to register due to the fear of separation and deportation. Acculturation. The level of a person's acculturation, how much they have embraced or adopted the predominant culture or the place they live in, can play a role in mental health and access to care. Acculturation has been found to predict an increased willingness to use mental health care services between first and second generation immigrants from various cultural backgrounds. Hispanic and Latinx communities have added risk of experiencing mental health issues because of the stress they face with discrimination while also trying to navigate between different cultures. So, the stigma. People in the Hispanic Latinx community are very private and may not want to talk about the challenges at home or in their lives. This can continue the cycle of stigma about mental health within the community. Talking about mental health issues may be considered taboo. Many in the Latinx community are familiar with the phrase "La ropa sucia se lava en casa." Don't air your dirty laundry in public. Some people don't seek treatment for mental illness out of the fear of being labeled as locos or crazy, or that it brings shame and unwanted attention to the family. Faith communities may also be a source of distress if they are not well informed and do not know how to support families dealing with mental health concerns. Stigma within the Hispanic community can also lead to a lack of information, as individuals may not recognize the symptoms of mental health conditions or know where to seek help. In turn, this may cause individuals not to get the treatment they really need. When mental health is not openly talked about, people seeking treatment may have limited knowledge and comfort with the different types of therapy or psychiatric medications that are available. We cannot know what no one has taught us. Privacy is very important, absolutely, when it comes to talking about feelings and challenges in our lives. Seeking mental health treatment doesn't mean you will lose your privacy. Your diagnosis, your treatment plan, and your discussions with your mental health provider are confidential. A provider is bound by law to maintain your privacy. They cannot share your private information with anyone else without your permission. Keep in mind that mental health professionals are trained to understand what you are going through, and they will listen without judgment. So, on to how to seek the culturally and linguistically competent care. Often, the first person you may end up talking to will be your primary care doctor. And that's a great place to start when you're looking for help and trying to understand what's going on with yourself or your loved one. They can give you a referral or recommend a mental health professional. Often, community and faith organizations may have a list of mental health providers in your area as well. So when looking at a provider who is culturally and linguistically competent, it's okay to ask lots of questions. You want to get a sense of their level of cultural awareness. A provider should expect these questions and welcome them, since this can help your provider better understand what is important to you and or your loved one's treatment. So here are just a few questions to think about asking when you're talking to someone new or deciding, do I want to see this person for help? You can ask them, have you treated other Hispanic, Latinx people, or whatever identifier you prefer? You can ask them, have you worked with someone that has lived experiences such as mine? Have you worked with someone with my identities? Have you received training in cultural competence or Hispanic, Latinx mental health? How do you see my cultural background influencing our communication and my treatment? And it's very much encouraged to ask, what type of modality do you practice with your clients? For example, do you come from cognitive behavioral, psychodynamic? Do you use EMDR, neurofeedback? And don't be afraid to ask what's more in detail is involved in those types of modalities of treatment. How do you modify your modalities for clients of color? How do you integrate social justice into your practice? And how can I tell if I'm making progress? Again, these are definitely questions that it's okay to ask. Whether you seek help from a primary care doctor or a mental health professional, you should finish your sessions with the health professional feeling heard and respected. So after you meet with this person and you're deciding, do I want to go back? Is this someone that I feel connected to or that I feel can help me? You can ask yourself some of these questions. Did I feel heard? Do I feel like my practitioner understood my concerns? Did my provider communicate well with me? Is my provider willing to integrate my beliefs, practices, identity, and cultural background into my treatment plan? Did I feel that I was treated with respect and dignity? Do I feel like my provider understands and relates well with me? If your preferred language is not English, you can let the office staff know when you're scheduling your appointment. This will give them time to get an interpreter before your visit. Don't hesitate to ask your provider to use a certified medical interpreter. A certified medical interpreter is also bound by the same confidentiality laws. They can't go around talking about the private things you discuss with your provider. Something to think about when you are using an interpreter or your loved one is needing an interpreter is that you want to observe that the mental health provider is looking directly at the individual when speaking and not just communicating with the interpreter. You want to see that the provider is asking short questions and communicates with short messages to promote the effectiveness of the interpretation and to reduce errors of miscommunication. You also want to see that your provider is allowing enough time for the interpreter to finish their statements and for you, the individual, to ask the questions that you need to. If you believe that language barriers are negatively affecting your mental health treatment, consider bringing it up to your mental health provider. Don't be afraid to let them know how you're feeling. They may be able to schedule more frequent appointments or longer appointments so that they can allow adequate time for the use of the interpreter. I just wanted to touch on that certainly natural medicine or home remedies, we don't want to discount them because some individuals prefer traditional healers and home remedies to deal with health-related issues. Mental health isn't the exception. If these healing methods are important to you, please don't hesitate to use them. However, I would encourage you to still seek help from a mental health professional or primary care doctor. Ask your doctor to make these healing practices part of your treatment plan. Mental health professionals have experience and knowledge of effective types of these types of treatments and what may work for you. You may use both approaches in your road to recovery. Faith and spirituality. We don't want to discount faith and spirituality because it can definitely provide support and help when you're dealing with a mental health condition. If spirituality is important to you, please let your doctors know how important faith is to you. Your spiritual practices can be a part of your treatment plan. Reach out to your spiritual leaders and faith community. They might also be able to provide help and support during this difficult time caused by the mental health condition. At the same time, we must keep in mind that sometimes faith communities can add additional stress if they are not well informed and they don't know how to support the family dealing with mental health conditions. For example, if the faith community believes that it's sinful and wrong behavior of the parent that caused mental illness in the child, that isn't particularly helpful. Or believing that mental illness is as a result of your lack of faith or that you didn't pray enough. The relationship and communication between a person and their mental health provider is key in your treatment. It's very important for you to feel that your identity is understood by your provider for you to receive the best possible support and care. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. Ways we can help ourselves and our community. So, family involvement. Let's use our strong family network. Family support can help to alleviate the stigma of mental disorders and improve the individual's communication with their family members. If we all inform ourselves more about mental health, we can become better at supporting other family members and our community. Educating ourselves about the physiological roots of mental illness can be helpful as well. Lack of information or misunderstanding fuels the stigma around mental health issues. Get details about any mental health diagnosis that you or your loved one may receive. Discuss the treatment options. Get your questions answered. It's okay to ask your provider lots and lots of questions. And I'm really emphasizing that because I know sometimes it can be difficult when you're talking to a doctor because you don't want them to shut you down. But if you're speaking with a mental health provider specifically, they should be welcoming those questions and not getting flustered or frustrated with you. Understanding that there are biological underpinnings of mental health disorders and that chemicals in our brain can play a primary role in mental health disorder can help us to see mental illness differently. You're not alone in your fear of having a conversation with your loved ones about mental health. As I mentioned before, shame and stigma may play a huge role when you're thinking about discussing your own mental health or your loved one's mental health and you're wanting support. But the more aware you are of your specific mental health struggles and needs, the better you will be able to communicate your needs to others. So mental health is not stagnant. It can change as your life changes. How you understand your mental health might not be how you understand it now. You might not want to share your mental health concerns with your family, and that's okay too. But if you decide to talk about it with your family or loved ones, figuring out why you want to talk to them about it can be helpful. Some people have said that it helps them to be more authentic with their family members. and they're able to see their connections grow because they're able to be more vulnerable and not feel the shame when they're relating to their loved ones. For others, talking about mental health concerns helps to normalize the conversation, and that's a way of breaking down that stigma of getting help. Being able to discuss shared traumas like the impact of structural racism or anti-immigrant sentiments, or even the mistrust of the healthcare industry, can help us validate the real world implications of our collective well being. It's through our open and honest conversations with the people around us that we can help shatter those outdated narratives, and we can stop feeding all that old stigma about it, about mental health. When sharing your struggles with your loved ones, you might choose to share your diagnosis or your symptoms in an understandable way. For example, if you're very, very anxious, you could say something like, when I'm driving, I get really nervous and I fear that I might hit someone or get into an accident. And this could be a way to describe some of your anxiety. I need some help with finding ways to be less nervous. Now, certainly, you might get pushback from your family, so be prepared to redirect the conversation when you feel family members or loved ones are reacting negatively. Remind them that your mental health journey is about you wanting to be your best. And, oftentimes it has nothing to do with your family members or your parents. After sharing your diagnosis or struggles with your family and loved ones, it's important to reflect on what support you might need from them. This is an opportunity to share where you would like to set boundaries to create a safer environment for yourself. So, if you're with us live, if you could share some maybe traditions or celebrations or rituals that you have with your family in the Q&A at this point, um, or if anyone has a comment about what I've talked about so far. I'll give it a few minutes. I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm a little bit thirsty. Okay, not sure if we have any comments. Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right. Well, just to kind of, in conclusion, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the community as a whole and things that, in my mind, really speak to the voice that we have as a community. Um, Even though Latinx Hispanic communities have been here in North America, in the way before the United States existed as a nation, our communities continue to drive this country, the United States, progress. And we don't want to forget about our contributions. As a community, we can ensure that our contributions are not lost, but that they're recognized, remembered, and honored. Many people are unaware of the incredible role Hispanics have in culture, business, science, economy, and the arts. We are thought leaders, music, acting, and filmmaking icons, athletes, doctors, entrepreneurs, and top corporate executives. We are taxpayers, voters, Army and Navy Corps. We are families, individuals, young people, and beloved grannies, and we can be helpful together. We are definitely shaping the future of the United States. It's interesting, I found that by 2025, it is projected that Hispanics will contribute to the United States gross domestic product growth more than non-Hispanics. Latina nurses are expected to grow from 18% to 25% of the population. college enrollment of Latinos will increase 26% between 2015 and 2026. By 2030, the projected U.S. Hispanic population is 132.8 million people. That's 30.2% of the total U.S. population. 2 out of every 5 Major League Baseball players will be Hispanic, and the Hispanic voter population is expected to grow to 18% by 2036. By 2060, Hispanics under 18 years old will account for 31.9% of the total U.S. youth population. So, a lot of youth will identify as Hispanic by 2060. And 1 in 3 women in this country will be Latina. So, kind of again, I think the big message here is that the more we have these type of community conversations about mental health, the more we can move our communities forward. Okay, next slide, please. So, does anyone have any questions at this point? If you're here live, I'll just wait a few minutes and see. See, there's a question here. Oh, thanks, Bonnie. Thanks for letting me know that you appreciate some of the information that I was sharing. It's not always easy. Yeah, so I wanted to show you that some resources that might be helpful to share with family or loved ones or others in your community. NAMI has their National Alliance for Mental Illness. That's what NAMI stands for. And so there's different groups in different states, but NAMI California has a program, and you can go to that link, namica.org resources. And if you put in Latino AX resources specifically, you will get to those resources that are helpful. And they're in Spanish and English. Additionally, some other links. Therapy for Latinx provides resources for the community to heal, thrive, and become advocates for your own mental health. And latinxtherapy.com also talks about breaking down the stigma of mental health related to Latinx community and learning some of the self-help techniques and how we can support ourselves and one another. Some book recommendations. And, when I saw these, I said, wow, I haven't heard of some of these. So I'm really interested myself in reading some of these books. My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma, and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. That looks really interesting to me. Also, It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. As we all know, and I spoke of briefly, there's been a lot of historical trauma, and even certainly it continues sadly to this day. And then the book Attached, The New Science of Adult Attachment and How It can help you find and keep love. And we all could use love, right? Certainly, the more love I feel, the better I feel.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
I was just thanking you and our audience. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, with our community. That will, of course, benefit everyone. And thank you, audience, for being here. And you were so patient with us. And apologies for the beginning that we had difficulties to start on time. And we'll see you next time with another mental health topic.
Thank
Everyone,
you.
bye.